Okay, now let's get into how the skull varies between people and also between gender. Okay, so first to kind of talk about the variation between individuals, we'll look at the bell curve, right? And this is kind of how it breaks down, right? And this is what I try to describe with all the anatomy that I talk about, is that there's huge variation in the limits of the spectrum in how things appear in life, right? And I can only hope to cover the center of this curve, right? The fringes of the bell curve, all sorts of ridiculous things happen. You know, people don't have 2 arms and 2 legs anymore. People don't have 10 fingers. Ridiculous stuff happens out here. So I can't account for everything. I can tell you guys and try to give you guys describe the things that are most consistent between most of the population, which is kind of one standard deviation either side of the bell curve, right? And that's kind of this section, right? And that fits the majority of the population, right? Probably 68% of the population, 34 on either side, right? As soon as you get to either side of the bell curve, the one standard deviation, you're getting into bigger noses, bigger ears that flare out, noses that are hooked over, eyes that are spaced a little bit further apart than average, eyes that are closer, faces that are taller or thinner or wider. You know, this is where variation really starts to happen. And then once you're beyond kind of 2 standard deviations, you're out into the fringes where things occur in less than 2% of the population, right? So that's like really extreme examples of things. So I'm just kind of trying to introduce this idea because I will describe things that are common, and I'm sure in your own practice, in your own observation, you will see things that I've not talked about, or things that kind of break the constructional rules that I talk about. And those, it happens in life, it always does, but that's very potentially stuff that happens way out here at the fringes, right? So hopefully I can reliably talk about this stuff for you. Okay, and to kind of illustrate this, I want to show you guys this little sequence of images by a photographer called Alex Kaiser, and he published a book called Heads, and I have a few of those images from the book that I just want to show you the variation between faces, right? Okay, I can't draw on this, but I'm just going to flip through these kind of one by one, and you can see just the huge variation in the structure, alignment of features back and forth, huge kind of deep jaw here, shallower here, and so looking through this, just to understand the variability in proportions, right? Look how wide the angle of the jaw is here. Dome of the head, how kind of all the cranium is fused together, totally variable. And this is really the important stuff artistically, is that you understand how these things fit together, and then how they can stretch and squish and kind of widen or elongate. Look at this guy's chin, right? Look at the jaw on this guy compared to, say, this guy, right? 2 adjacent images, right? Just huge variation. This guy has really, really deep mandible, which is amazing, right? And it's those kind of characteristics. As long as they're constructed correctly, you can get away with them. Right, and this is really interesting to look at, just to see the variety. And I recommend that you grab a copy of the book if you have a bookstore. Maybe Amazon's a good place. This guy has a little torpedo-shaped head, a little bit like one of those shells that Bugs Bunny always tests with a hammer to see if they're going to explode or not. Okay, other things, like you start to feel different depths in the orbit as well. So we've seen construction of the orbit. Some are different heights, which allows for more of the eyelid to be visible in the top, more of a closed orbit, right? Open, closed. Widths of the chin, we'll look at that in a second when we get to gender, kind of this kind of depression in the middle, not a dimple, just a little bit of a concavity. Okay, so we're kind of getting to different shaped heads, and then bam, huge 2-3 standard deviations out on the bell curve, right? Look at the dimensions of this guy's head. Totally kind of blows out the average proportions, and this is the kind of thing that you could observe in life that you could call me and say, Scott, all the things you said about the skull being this and this and this is not true. It can be like this, and I'm like, yes, it can. It's a statistical outlier, right? So always keep in mind that there's extremes in the variation as well. Okay, we're just looking through a lot of these. You can see quite pronounced temporal line here, right? So must be a chemotherapy patient, right? So the only requirement for about the photo shoot was that they were bald, right? So you have some females that have no hair, and you just see this line right here, quite pronounced. You really see the construction of the skull under this one. Okay, a lot of these images are showing a lot of soft tissue characteristics, and this is going to be really important stuff for us to talk about later on in the course, because, right, you can see skull, it doesn't look like the skulls that I'm showing you, right, but all this stuff hangs off of the critical landmarks that we're looking at, the construction of the zygomatic arch and the zygomatic bone and the orbits and kind of all the little sections where kind of ligaments grab onto. So yeah, the skull underpins all this, but we are seeing a lot of variation in soft tissue as well, you know, little fat deposits and wrinkles under the eyes. Okay, so I'm going to wrap this up right there, and I'm going to switch back and we're going to talk a little bit about gender. Okay, now a few words on variation of the skull due to gender. Obviously, there's a big difference in the faces of males and females, and this all does come back to bony underpinnings. So the construction of the skull, the proportions of the skull vary between sexes, obviously. But before we go too far into this, I just want to do a quick little bit of the bell curve, illustration of the bell curve for you. So we put men out here, male characteristics, kind of going this way. Distribution looks like that, right? And at the other end of the curve, we can have female characteristics going this way. And it's kind of like average femininity. And it goes like this, right? And what happens with both of these is there's this area in between where you get both traits, right? So there's a lot of fuzziness in this middle section where you can't actually determine just from the skull, just from the structure of the skull, whether somebody's male or female. And a lot of the kind of anthropological databases you might explore will have listed either the remains of the skull as definitively male, definitively female, or uncategorized, meaning it falls somewhere in this where there's no super strong characteristic one way or another, or they're overlapping. Okay, so let me just go through these now. And so male skull at the top, kind of very classic example of female skull at the bottom. Okay, so first, kind of the first thing is angle of the skull, right? So the frontal bone. On a male skull, it has kind of a receding direction, quite vertical in a classically female skull. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, I'll just try to do different colors for each of these, and I'll write this. Angle of the skull. We won't say skull, we'll say frontal bone. What am I talking about? Frontal bone / forehead. Okay, number 2 is superciliary arches. Right, this characteristic is definitively male. Although you will see females with them, it's again this overlap. The bigger, more pronounced they are, the more likely someone's skull is to be masculine. And in profile, they give you this this little bump here before receding back like this. Okay, relatively less down here. Okay, let me see. We've done green. We'll go blue for number 3. I don't know if this is going to show up very well. But number 3 is to do with the jaw, right? So the mandible is deeper and more angular in a man. So we have a steeper angle here at the corner of the jaw, the angle of the jaw. On a female, it's a little bit shorter in this first leg, so it doesn't have the same depth. So shallower. And then this angle is a little bit less rectangular, right? So it ends up being this kind of angle of the jaw wider. Okay, so you get this sloping descent down to the chin. So we'll call this depth of mandible. Then, let's see, number 4 in beautiful cyan brings us out to kind of the mental eminence, right? So the kind of the chin. And you have a projecting chin in a male skull, right? And a female skull is relatively less projecting, more straight down, a softer transition between chin to lower teeth. Okay, so that's projecting chin. And kind of related to projecting chin is in the front view, the female chin tapers to a nice point, typically, meaning this is all kind of continuously convex going back. Male chin, in contrast from the front view, is wide and concave, and we just saw this in one of those heads. I was talking about the chin being a little bit wider, and that's again a very male characteristic. So, width of chin and depression, bony depression, as opposed to a dimple, which is not a bony depression. Okay, now beyond that, we have kind of related to superciliary arches is the superior orbital margin up here can get quite prominent in a man, right? So this is another feature of testosterone. It is very kind of thickened and robust, and you can see that in the uber male skull that I'll show you shortly. It's all quite a bit thinner and doesn't flare out as much on a female skull, right? So superior orbital margin thicker. If I could spell properly, it would be better for reading on a man. And let's see, the last one has to do with some things that are relatively removed from the face, but still kind of interesting constructional variations. And it has to do with the muscular attachments. We would say skeletal muscular attachments. So you get a little flare out of the jaw here, right? A bigger kind of insertion for the masseter, which we'll talk about in detail next week. Relatively small there. You have a much more prominent mastoid process because of a more powerful sternocleidomastoid. At the back, you have kind of a little hook that develops off the external occipital protuberance, which is the attachment for nuchal ligaments, and there's little depressions in here for the insertions of things like the trapezius and other neck muscles. So you get quite a bony kind of prominence back here on a robust male. On a female, this is all quite gentle and smooth. Mastoid process is really kind of dainty and softened. Okay, those are the main characteristics. Other things, one last thing, if I have any more colors left, the gray, depressing gray at number 8, but just the prominence of the zygomatic bone out here is just kind of a developmental thing, where just a general, more feminine prominence in a woman, right? So less developed, less robust, less resistant to damage. Essentially, the male cheekbone becomes a little bit more robust with testosterone. Okay, so the other eminence, more robust, we'll say. Okay, more robust, prominent. Okay, so that is it. Let's look at a couple images and try to see these differences. So these are 2 of the skulls in the studio, European male, European female. And so let me get a good color. So superciliary arches, less so, hardly anything there. You see a more pronounced orbital margin. See how that flares out here? Quite gentle here. In fact, almost non-existent. And that gives that nice soft transition on the upper eyelid fold of a female, right? A bit more sharp and edgy on a man. Okay, you see mastoid process here, a little bit less on her. Depth of the jaw coming down, kind of a more right angle here, a little bit shallower and a little bit softer projection of the mandible forward. At the front, this comes to a point, and this one tapers in is wider, tapers in the middle with a dimple, not a dimple, a depression, and then back. Hard to appreciate the angle of the forehead, but this is quite vertical here, and this is actually, as we have kind of seen, more sloped. Okay, so those are the critical sex differences. Just a quick comparison here. Depth, let me just change colors. Depth, sharper, kind of 90-degree angle. Shallower and more gradual descent. Look at the chin, kind of going like this. Chin fat on here as well, right? But that holds out, the bone holds it out, more projecting on the man. much more prominent superciliary arches and forehead going back, forehead vertical. Okay, just a quick look at those. Same again here, more of the same. And some of it can get quite subtle. These are small variations in angle, but if you add it together and combine it with feminine construction of features, then in total you bias the overall final appearance towards feminine. Okay, so a couple other skulls to look at. Just for variations, right, we have the European male on the left and African male on the right. I dropped him when I was visiting some studio not too long ago, and he had a big accident on his front teeth, and I've lost him, so I can't replace him. So he looks a little bit funny missing his front teeth, but the rest of the structure is okay, thankfully. Okay, so the major difference is nasal aperture, right? And this is kind of a racial characteristic, right? On average, people of African descent have a wider nasal aperture, and again, this is a bell curve distribution, right? So you say on average is here. Some do, some don't. Likewise, European male, somebody can have a really wide nose as well. So these are just statistical biases, genetic biases. Okay, and so a wide nasal aperture eventually leads to wider kind of nasal cartilage and wider nostrils to let the air into a wider aperture. Okay, that's the big difference between these two. Other interesting things is look how prominent this flared angle of the jaw is. A little bit here, but more in this skull actually. Okay, and now let's compare European male versus the Uber male, which is a guy that has like hypertestosterone. And you can see as I just kind of flip these, you can kind of compare and contrast visually. All the things that I was describing on the male plates as the sex characteristics are like ramped up on this guy, way off the end, right? So he's a couple standard deviations, at least down the masculine side of the chart, of the bell curve, right? So we're seeing super prominent orbital margins, super prominent superciliary arches, even areas through here, which are just simply attachments for facial muscles, like muscles of expression, which don't really pull that hard, are super crusted over to give support. Insertion points for zygomatic major, crusted over with bone. Super wide chin, as you would expect, and look at the hook on the jaw here. At the angle of the jaw, this is bony structure to support huge chewing muscles, right? That's essentially his muscles of mastication just sit right in here, and the guy eats nails for breakfast. That's all there is to it, It's really cool to see kind of the extremes here. Okay, so if we're actually going to try to find the uber male in life, who might it be, right? If we brought that guy back, maybe run a little competition, fourth place. Maybe this guy, right? He's got some good superciliary arches, pretty wide through the zygomatic bone, zygomatic arch, and he's got a nice wide chin, a little depression in the middle. Good enough for fourth place, right? Let's see. Third place, this guy shows a lot of like hyper male characteristics. Look at the width of the jaw, right? The angle of the jaw, super flared out. Talked about the chin, right? Being a very male characteristic. Big depression in the middle, quite a bit of width, decent superciliary arches. You see frontal bone. We can't quite see, the angle of the forehead receding or not, but in general, this guy's good enough for third place. Second place goes to Kurgan from Highlander, right? If you look at this, look at the height of those. Right, this is the superciliary arches on him, and then he also gets second place for a super deep kind of mandible. Right, so we talked about this depth being a big male characteristic, and he's got a lot of it. Okay, which ends up giving you like a big chin area in here if you divide put the lips in kind of at a reasonably proportioned location. Second place. So who is in first place is the question, and to be honest, it's a tie for first between two guys. Great Khali, yes, that is real, and Nikolai Valuev, a boxer. So two athletes, really. We have a WWE superstar and a boxer here, former heavyweight champion of the world, and that's it. You can see like super prominent features on these guys, and to be honest, it's not quite a fair competition because these guys suffer from acromegaly, which is gigantism, and so they have kind of a pituitary disorder that makes them continue to grow beyond where a normal person would stop. So this guy's expressing that in just like overdevelopment of the mandible, right? Overdevelopment of the frontal bone. And him, he has the same kind of major characteristic: frontal bone really projecting, receding, kind of cranium, chin reasonably sized, but super width through the zygomatic bone. You can see the widths of the zygomatic arches right here. Super wide, super wide. Okay, and so let's just see a little bit more about the great Khali, just to put it in perspective. Yep, that is real. This is not forced perspective. This guy is maybe 6 foot tall, actually, so he is literally a giant. And that's what happens when you wrestle a giant. It doesn't end well. It's real. That's a real guy. Super. And now Nikolai Valuev, so again, former heavyweight champion of the world, actually beaten for the heavyweight title because he just couldn't be bothered boxing, I guess. But this is what happens when you do box him, right? And it's not really fair, is it? I mean, you can imagine biblical times, David versus Goliath, this is what it would be like. Not really fair, but in fact, as the story goes, this guy did win the fight and took the heavyweight championship from him, right? Because he could box, and this guy wasn't bothered. He didn't end up knocking him out. And that's the end of the story. And so with the end of the story comes the end of the skull lectures, right? So you guys can jump ahead to the Gallery of Ominent for the skull and see a little bit more about what can go wrong. And then we have some assignments coming up still as well. All right, hope this has been a little bit informative, and see you again soon.